there's a spreadsheet with this. I mean, it's totally optional. But if you've been on like other sessions of mine, you'll hear me, I kind of repeatedly talk about some of the themes around metrics and growth dashboards and things like that. This is kind of our latest version of a bunch of different growth models that you can feel free to download and play around with. Basically, it'll give you some additional context on like what we're talking about today when I get into things like growth modeling and retention and other types of measurement. So if you've got a system like Mixpanel or a big data platform that you're working with, then this is probably going to be a little bit reductive. But we actually use these tools internally, and we work with these tools with a bunch of different accelerators in the US who kind of use this little suite of products. So hopefully you find some value there. But download it if you can. I'm going to dig in, and then Aoife, maybe you could keep an eye on the wait room. I think we had about 20-ish people sign up, so I would expect a few will join late. We're also going to record this. And I also don't think we're going to take the whole hour in terms of content. So I will try to leave it open at the end if we've got some time to answer questions and to maybe even spend some time with each of you on some of the things that you're focused on with growing your own company. So I'm going to get going here. Anyways, today's topic is on the 5 key focus areas to drive startup growth. And I guess my quick background is I've spent a lot of time in entrepreneurship and in marketing and in product development. And I've seen a lot of success and a ton of failure. And I think failures I've got a whole podcast about failure, actually. So the latest iteration of my podcast talks about growth through the lens of failure. And I think it's really important because one of the things that gets lost as we're building these products and these companies is we get kind of caught up with like what's going on day to day, and we lose focus of some of the really important core kind of foundational elements that really separate the great companies from the ones that just, kind of sputter along for a really long time and ultimately fail. Most startups fail. So the statistic is pretty abysmal. It's pretty depressing, but I've like studied startup failure. And it's something like 87% or 90% of startups are going to fail within their first 10 years. And I've certainly been, I've been along for the ride with companies that have just completely gone under. Sometimes it's pretty apparent that it's going to be fast. And other times you're in a situation for years and it just catches up on you and you realize that what you thought you were going to be able to do, you just can't do. So hopefully I give you some context today around some of the areas where I think that we as founders need to focus. And so this is kind of a brief whirlwind tour of the major components that make up growth. And I'm going to go right into the first theme that I don't think a lot of marketing and growth people talk about, but it's product road mapping. So who here's got a product? Product. Okay. This is how I think you should build. Right. So as founders, we have this bias towards action, right? Like we want to just get our stuff out into the wild. We want to just keep building. Building makes us feel really, really good. I started my career as a software engineer. I was never the best software engineer, but it's pretty exhilarating being able to think of something and then build it and then put it out into the wild. And I think that's all really, really great stuff. The challenge, I think, is when we tend to overbuild. And so the way that I think you should think about the starting points for even at the base level product road mapping is there's kind of 2 sets of things that you need to think about organizationally in terms of what you're putting out into the market. The first is like all the stuff that you have to build. And so like, yeah, you have to build it, right? So if you're building a native app, you have to have a native app. Like you can't launch a native app on the web. Like if there's functionality that's required from a native app, then you got to build those components in. I use the analogy of a travel company. I've spent a bunch of time in the travel space. If you're a travel company and you're selling travel to consumers or to businesses, you need a booking platform. There's a bunch of really meaty stuff that you have to build to even get to like an MVP. There is no MVP in the true sense of what a minimum viable product should be. But that's about it, right? So like in the early days of Velocity Growth, we were called Growth University. And before it was Growth University, it was called Growth Minded, because I didn't know what to name the stuff that I was working on. It turns out like I was building content. The first version of our product literally was just short snippets of content that we would put out into the wild to see, like, did anybody care that we were working on this stuff? We didn't go build this massive platform on an e-learning system to like try to sell, because we didn't have enough conviction yet. Well, the reason why I started that way is because I learned the hard way, just getting beaten down over the years of overbuilding. So the things that you know you need to build, yeah, build them, right? But I would really, really, really urge you to start thinking about an experiment stream for your product roadmap. So basically the way it works is that anything that you don't foundationally need to support the needs of the business, and you have to be honest about this, should be tested against the market before you've built a lot of product. And what does that mean? Build a landing page and drive traffic to it and have customer discovery conversations to understand what their wants and needs are, right? Don't go heads down for 2 years building this thing that you come up for air and you're like, how am I going to sell it? You have to work with your customers along the way. Like the great companies outside of what Steve Jobs did with Apple, right? Everybody's like, well, I'm a product person. I'm going to build this amazing product. Well, yeah, you can do that. But 99.999% of us don't have that concept and the timing where like the whole world is coming online and we can build an iPhone that everybody happens to buy. You know, most of us are in a spot where there's probably some competition and what we're doing isn't so novel that we have to get in front of these customers, get in front of users, have as many conversations as possible, and learn the hard truths about what they value with your business. So that's how I think about product. I spent most of my career as a product manager, and I distill it down into this one like overly simplistic slide. But the faster you understand that it's not about the features you build, and it's not even about the process by which you build features, it's, are you building the right thing at the right time for the right buyer, right? That's what's going to save you potentially years. And you got to start thinking about it now. Okay. So the next thing is, and again, for those of you that joined after my kickoff, there's some growth tools and models that I put together in spreadsheets that you can hit here. So go to bit.ly VG models or scan this QR code and it'll download a spreadsheet. We can also share the spreadsheet after with you. What I'm going to get into next are components around growth modeling. So, well, what is the concept here? You need a model, right? It's really, really, really hard to build a business if you don't understand what you're trying to do from a metric standpoint. And early on, it's tricky, right? Because early on, you don't have any conviction on anything other than you've got this idea. But as you start to move into the market itself, it becomes virtually impossible to grow your business strategically if you don't understand the things that go into the business model itself. So I always will start with a fairly basic growth model. And what a growth model is, it consists of a cost per unit. So what is the thing that you're selling and how much does it cost? The number of things that you sell over a period of time. So if you're selling a widget for $4, okay, well, how many of those do you have to sell within a month to actually hit your metrics? How quickly are you growing month over month? That's what's called a monthly growth rate. Does anybody here know what their monthly growth rate is? Like, are you tracking this yet? Kind of, sort of, maybe. It becomes really important as you start to find product market fit. And if you're a subscription business, it's also, okay, what are the total number of active subscribers you have? And then what's your churn per unit of time? Those two things become, for a subscription business, literally the most important things. It's not like, hey, what feature am I building? Or what marketing campaign? It's like, am I acquiring customers that become the main metric that I'm going after? And do they stick around or do they just go away? We've seen a lot of scenarios with especially consumer companies who have figured out customer acquisition, but haven't figured out retention. And I would argue that you have to take a retention first view, and we'll get into this in a little bit. But here are a couple of things to look at. So I like to start with targets. So with a growth model, this is aspirational and it's forward looking. And so if you don't have a spreadsheet like this already, I would urge you to build one. Year one target becomes kind of your main metric here. So you can see with my model for year one, I'm getting to 79,000 in revenue. And in this model, I've got a $29 product. I've got a 20% monthly churn rate. I'm growing 20% month over month. I started with 25 subscribers and it cost me $100 to acquire a customer. So what I can do is then I can look at, okay, well, what do I need to do in month one? So let's say month one is next month, it's February. If I'm going to get to $725 in MRR, then it means that I have to bring in 25 new customers. And to pull in 25 new customers, based on my early thinking here, my rough back envelope, it's going to cost me $2,500 in paid marketing spend. Or you could argue, let's say it's SEO that you're working on, it's going to take me 6 weeks to implement the SEO content that I'm going to need to rank. And so you pull that model, you build it and then you pull it back and you look at it in terms of year 1, year 2, year 3. So where I think it gets really interesting is when you start to add in some of your other costs to the model. This is not meant to replace your P&L, but I like to build what I call a scratch P&L. So I work with a lot of accelerator companies and kind of pre-seed, seed, and Series A companies. And I'll ask like, okay, well, what's your like burn? What's your scratch P&L? And they're like, well, my accountant does that. I think it's like $50K a month. Well, you kind of need to know, like, when are you running out of money? How much money do you need to have in the bank to support the efforts to grow your business the way that you want to grow it? And if you're raising money or if you've raised money, you're going to have to pitch a model like this to an investor. So like hard stop. The second you start having conversations, especially like maybe a year ago, you didn't really need a growth model to raise money because people were basically just throwing money at any idea, even if it was a terrible idea. In 2023, like you're going to get picked apart. I'm hearing from founders that it's taken them 3 to 4 times the amount of time to actually get checks in the door. So the more you can own your metrics, the better off you're going to be with fundraising. So I show this because like the difference too, and I go into this with other modules that I teach, but the difference between 10% and 20% retention on a $30 a month product is material. So if you model this out with 10% churn instead of 20% churn, you'll have roughly 20% more revenue at the end of the year by having less churn, but you will have had to spend 50% less on acquiring customers because you don't have to acquire as many customers to hit your same metric, right? So churn works both ways, and retention is just a really, really super interesting thing to look at. So do you guys know what your retention rates are for your businesses, or are you still kind of working it out? All right, Simon's nodding your head. Okay, that's cool. That's cool. All right, the next kind of big pillar, really, really important, acquisition and activation. And so again, I've got like hours and hours worth of content for both of these themes, but for this webinar, which is a whirlwind tour of this stuff, when we're thinking about customer acquisition, where I think we often miss the mark is that we don't understand how to quantify the handoff between what marketing and kind of what either product-led or marketing-led channels are doing, and then what the product itself is doing. And so we call this an endpoint acquisition goal metric. So most acquisition campaigns that you run, I would argue, in fact, all of them, unless it's like a brand building campaign, should have a specific goal associated with it. And you may think that the goal is to drive a subscriber, but it actually may be that you need to drive a lead, right? You may need a precursor step before the step where somebody gets out their credit card and pays you money. But I want you to think about this endpoint acquisition goal metric as a handoff between top of funnel and product. And so common things here that we'll want to look at. So if you're thinking about, okay, well, general top of funnel marketing, right? Channel marketing, we're going to look at things like views, clicks, maybe app download, or maybe click-through rates, cost per click, what's resonating, general engagement. For product and for endpoint acquisition goal, it's going to be things like app downloads or white paper downloads or number of signups to a webinar or number of emails that you capture or free trials if you're more product-led. And then you've got this lagging revenue indicator. So your lagging revenue indicator would be things like new subscribers or number of purchases, right? And when you're thinking about kind of these leading and lagging indicators, what often we do is we're kind of like, okay, well, I got X number of downloads, I'm doing pretty well. Or I've got a lot of customers that we work with, when they come into us, they'll say like, okay, well, tell us what your metrics are. And they'll say, well, I track our click-through rate and I track new subscribers. Okay, but there's nothing in the middle. Or I track views and then I track free trials, but they're not able to attribute that campaign back to like an actual conversion. And so again, this is very basic and kind of rudimentary, but hopefully gives you a starting point. What I'd like to do is put all of this data based on what your top of funnel metric is, what your middle of funnel metric is, and then what your revenue metric is, put them into a spreadsheet or into a Google report and actually look at it on a weekly basis. So in the downloadable tools that I sent you, you'll have a version of this dashboard. It's very manual. There's no automation in this, but what I'd urge you to do is start to look at what's happening week over week and month over month with each of these core components that you're tracking. So for example, what you want to do is you want to get to a point where it's like, okay, I had a big spike in week 7 here on website visitors. However, the percentage of people that went from trial to subscribe is red. It dropped a lot. Well, what's happening, right? Well, we started Twitter ads, and Twitter ads drove a lot of volume, but they didn't drive a lot of conversions. And so somebody on your team might be saying, hey, like we got all this traffic. We're doing amazing. But you're looking at your revenue and your spend, and you're like, well, my customer acquisition cost is like almost as high as it's ever been. I spent more than I've ever spent before. My full conversion rate is lower than it was. And yes, I got some new revenue, but that new revenue was really expensive, right? So you really have to have a sense of ownership of these metrics. And as Aoife here can attest to, like we look at this stuff every week. I look at this stuff every day, because what I'm looking for are leading indicators into what's going to happen in a month or two down the road. Right. So that's kind of one way to quantify that. So with that theme in mind, choose an interval that you take your key metrics and you report on. So I always like to look at what happened on Monday through Sunday and report back on what happened last week. Now you can do a 30-day, but I think 30 days is too slow. Like I think it's too long. You really have to have a weekly cadence and interview of what you're looking at. And so every Monday morning, like we've got an all hands meeting where we review our metrics. We look at revenue, but we look at the leading indicators. How much deal flow do we have in the pipeline? What are the conversion rates? How long is it taking us to convert leads? What else is happening in the market? And we can use it as a time of reflection. And then the other thing that I think is really tricky for especially the earlier stage you are is understanding how to go and find customers. And a way oversimplified model that I like to look at is this awareness flow. So when you're thinking about where do I need to be hanging out to go find my customers? Like, should I be on TikTok, or should I be spending money on paid ads, or should I be spending time on SEO? Really what it comes down to is the user's level of problem awareness and their intent. So if a user is aware that they've got a problem and they're going to go seek a solution to that problem, then the main channels that you'll probably want to focus on as a company, at least getting started, is search engine marketing and SEO. Why? Because those are both high intent, and the user has raised their hand. They said, look, I'm looking for a solution to this problem. Now, if you're a consumer and you're looking for a vacation rental property to stay at, you're probably just going to go right to Airbnb, and you go right to the direct visit to Airbnb and use their search engine the same way that a consumer would use SEO out in the wild. So the great platforms, the Airbnbs and B&Bs of the world, have search platforms to capture high intent right within the platform itself, right? And so they built their entire products around that. But abstracting at a level, you have to think about this from what's that level of intent. If your audience doesn't really know that they've got a problem, or they don't really associate you with a solution to the problem yet, or they don't even know where to start. If you're building a new category, search generally is not great for you because your users, they're not searching for the things that are going to put you in front of them. Now, the channels that are going to work better for you are going to be paid social, influencer marketing, content marketing, thought leadership, and kind of just getting your brand out there more. And then you're going to drive people to your website, and you're going to try to get them to do that endpoint acquisition goal metric, which is like a download or a free trial or a sign up or whatever it is. And then do they purchase or engage? Yes or no? And if they don't, then you go back through this whole loop where you do remarketing and you do customer segmentation and you send emails to them and you reach out to them and you try to talk to them and you've got a sales assisted process, all of those things, right? But I've had hundreds and hundreds of conversations with founders. And when I ask them like, hey, does your customer have intent? If they can't answer that question, that's a big, big, big problem. And I would pause what you're doing with marketing to figure out, does the user look for the thing that I serve? That's really going to be the guiding principle for your early customer discovery. Now at scale, you're going to do all of this stuff, but it's very uncommon that you're going to find a 20% split on all the channels. Like you ask a late stage company, where do you get your conversions from? It's never like, 20% from paid, 20% from organic, 20% from outreach, 20% from partnership. It's usually like one or two channels dominate, and they still have to do all the other channels, but those are secondary channels for them, right? Like for us, paid acquisition is like a tertiary channel. We're really, really good at paid search and paid social. But when we're competing against agencies and independent consultants and big companies, like the cost for us to acquire customers from paid channels is too expensive for us to justify the cost. But if you're a consumer company or a mid-market SaaS or below, those channels work well. If you're enterprise, paid search has a purpose, but it's not directly going to result in sales. It's probably more of an account-based marketing plan that you need to go after. Oops. So let me go back here. This is where some of the tooling comes in. So Google Webmaster Tools, SpyFu, SEMrush, Ahrefs, Facebook ad library. So Facebook and Google now have what they call their transparency ad platforms. And you can literally see any ads that your competitors are running right now. So go to Facebook ad library. Google's got a ad library too. So if we're looking at, well, what are our competitors doing? Because we want to learn from our competitors because they're like 5 years ahead of us. And we want to pull the future forward. We just go look at what they're doing, because chances are somebody that's spending a bunch of money on Facebook and Google is trying to optimize that process and is probably using agencies like ours to like perfect that. And you can learn a lot from that. Like generally what they're running is the stuff that's working, right? All the rest of the stuff gets turned off and killed. So use these tools. They're not all free. Some of them are pretty pricey, but I'll give you another example. I was in SEMrush for hours and hours and hours and hours last night. Why? Because we've got a bunch of product ideas that we're iterating on. We're building one product and we've got a couple others that are kind of like these micro products that we're building. So I'm using SEMrush to do market research before I'm even doing the customer discovery, because I want to understand, like, is there high intent for these things that we're thinking about building? And for some of the stuff that we're considering building, it's like, no, there's actually no intent. So we know we're going to have to go low intent, and that's going to take a year. Okay, so we got to do some brand building and thought leadership around the concept if we're going to go that path. So use these tools, but I think also trust your gut in terms of where that split is in terms of that intent. Moving on here, the next step so we've talked a little bit about where customers are. We've talked about acquisition a little bit. We haven't talked too much about channels. That's not kind of in scope for today, but wave the magical wand and you're starting to drive people into your experience. So that first step of activation is actually the endpoint acquisition goal metric. So for us, with training, for example, the first step of our acquisition to activation handoff would be that somebody signs up for like a free training program or something like that. But there's all these other steps that you likely have to go through to lead your customer down the discovery and buying process. And so we just call these next step activation goals. So what are the linear steps that your customer has to go through on their journey. It doesn't mean that it's just a funnel that you put together that drives them through it, but it could be growth loops that you're using to move the user through the journey, but there likely is a linear customer journey that each and every one of us has to figure out to a really kind of low level so that we understand how do we push in to enable these customers to move through this process, right? And I'll show you an example of how Miro does this in a second. But before we get into the mechanics, I think the biggest opportunity and challenge with both activation and product-led growth is that these are really, really, really big areas of focus. And as product people and as marketers, we kind of lose focus on the value that we're providing to the user each and every step of the journey. And so there's that component to it, but there's also, what are the hooks and triggers that get the user to take action and move forward? And what's the constraint that you're bumping the user up against so that they feel some pain somewhere along the process so that you can alleviate that pain by having them get out their credit card, right? And building a business, especially a product organization, is all about leveraging those constraints against the value that you're bringing to the table. But we often don't think about constraints a lot. So let me show you how one of the best, fastest growing companies that I've seen, Miro, let me walk you through how they do this. So Miro shows you an ad on Twitter, or you hear about them from a friend and you go to their webpage, and then you have a beautifully designed webpage that exclusively focuses on trying to get you into start a free trial. So I've skipped all of that stuff, right? So like, go to Miro.com, check out what their homepage looks like. But you're going to notice really quickly that they do all of the things. They show social proof. They show how the product works. They've got great messaging. They've got a whimsical brand. It's beautiful. Okay. But they have one single pathway for you to go down, and that's to sign up for a free account. This is step one. Get started free today. They ask for your name, the work email, password. You agree to their terms. This is also what's interesting though. So they do two things here. They also let you sign up with all these other platforms. Okay. So like, hey, you can sign up with any of these things that you want. That's great. We're going to make it like really, really, really easy for you. And we're going to show you what's included. So you get 3 editable boards. And this becomes really interesting in future steps because their boards are their constraint. And watch how they do this. Step 2 of onboarding, right? So remember, you're trying to get the user to sign up for this darn thing. And I'm on step 2. And look at this little blue dots at the bottom. Now I'm on step like 2 of it looks like 4. So I'm like, okay, what's this all about? They asked me to put my team name in. They asked me to choose my role in a company. What's my company size? And then I can let anybody with like my email domain in, set up and continue. So that's step 2. Step 3, another push to invite team members. I can invite from Slack. I can invite from Gmail. I can copy this link. I can put their emails in and I can click send, or I could skip. I mean, even the button is like white background. Like they don't want you to skip this step. They really want you to fill this step in. And then it's like, what do you want to do? Choose one of these areas that is, like most applicable to what you're trying to do, the job that you're trying to accomplish right now. And if you didn't find what you wanted, you can start from scratch. Whoops. And then what they do is they bring you into their template library based on the personalized input that you had here. And then you click on it and then you create a board. So remember, the constraint was board. Okay. So what Miro's doing here is they're saying, okay, their endpoint acquisition goal is that you sign up for a free plan. That's what like all of top of funnel, all of marketing and the early parts of the product are focused on getting you to create that free plan. Their next step is that you create a board or you invite a teammate. The next step after that is that you create a second or third board. Why? Because you just invited a teammate and they go through onboarding. So by the time they get through onboarding, now there's 2 boards that are created, but also during onboarding, they invited somebody else on their team. So now you're at 3 boards. And remember what Miro told us? 3 boards is what you get under the free plan. So you invite your colleague, they invite their colleague, and this is like pure product-led growth right here in action, is they've already hit the constraint. And so now when you want to create a fourth board, you have to get out your credit card. And that's their end goal. So they are just relentless, right? Like everybody talks about like these product-led companies in terms of making it easy to sign up, but they've taken this and multiplied that by 100. They know exactly what they want. They want your credit card. They want you on a monthly subscription, but they leverage constraints and triggers and beautiful onboarding to get you down that pathway. And it works really, 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 really well. So, well, what can you do? Like if you're assuming you're a little bit earlier stage than Miro, well, you can look at each and every step of that funnel or of that growth loop and find areas that you can pick off that you can improve on. It means that you have to know your goals and you're going to want to pick off the lowest effort, highest return stuff that you can. There's a bunch of frameworks you can use. If you do a brainstorming session with your team and you have 50 ideas to improve your onboarding or your process or whatever, put it into like a RICE framework. Or if you download my spreadsheet, there's a framework that I kind of took some liberty with RICE on. Basically, you can quantify what you think the return on your investment in time on building that feature or making that update is going to be. You can also optimize your company to focus on the whole funnel. So I could go to my team at Velocity Growth and say like, hey, everybody, here's our goals next month. You know what you need to do over here. Figure out how you're going to optimize the whole funnel. And they'll just go off and they'll do it. Or I can be like, hey, Aoife, I want you to focus on this piece of the funnel. And I want Craig to focus on this piece of the funnel. And I want Jen to focus on this piece of the funnel. And so each person that's a subject matter expert in that area of your business can work on their optimizations. It doesn't really matter how you do this. Like when I've worked within organizations, I've generally put the strongest person on the thing on that area of focus within the company. But if you've got limited resources, you're probably just looking at what are my biggest opportunities to improve the conversion of traffic through this product. Okay, moving on to retention. I think this is the last component here, and then I'll take questions and stuff. So the challenge of the retention is that it takes a long time to report on. 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years. We're still getting customers in from stuff that we did 2 years ago. I mean, it's great. It's kind of crazy. Like we think we can impact the timing, and in some ways we can. We can do all the things that we think are right. But like at the end of the day, your customer just might not be ready to buy. So you do have to look at the short, mid, and long-term window. But what I think gets missed with retention is that like you do have leading indicators. You just have to figure out what they are, and you have to optimize around those leading indicators. And we call these leading indicators proxy metrics. So you can use these things called proxy metrics to gauge future retention. So if your proxy retention metric is effectively how likely is a user to positively impact your main retention metric. So if you're a subscription business, you have to find an earlier metric that will lead to subscription signups, but isn't the subscription signup itself, because you know that's probably going to take time. And the more you charge, the longer that time is going to take. So I'll give you some examples. So Netflix knows that if they can get users to consume 19 hours of content per month, that user will not go away. So 19 is that's their magic number. So what does Netflix do now that they know that it's 19 hours? You ever been on the web version of Netflix's homepage when you're logged in? If you hover over a title, it starts playing. They're literally doing everything they can to try to get you engaged right then and there. It's why at the end of an episode, it starts the next episode. It's why they always have recommendations. It's why they're simply just trying to get you to bump up against that 19 hours, which is their proxy metric that they know if you spend that 19 hours, you don't go away. For Zoom, it's X number of calls for X number of weeks. Like if Zoom can help you build a habit, you just are not going to go away, right? We're on Zoom right now. We use a different platform for podcasting and thought leadership. We use a different platform for team meetings. We use Google Meet for a lot of stuff, but for webinars, Zoom's the best. It's just the best. It's guaranteed to work, and it's easy, right? So they've got us hooked because we use it with some regularity, and we came in on a free plan. With a consumer product like Sandbox, which I was the chief product officer there for a while, if we could get somebody to send these letters that we charge $4 for, if we could get them to send 2 letters in their first week using the product, they were totally hooked. So find your proxy metric. And then what you want to start to look at is, okay, well, what does that metric look like over time? And what we're looking at here is what's called an activation curve. And this gets a little bit more complex, but I've got some sheets in that spreadsheet for you if you want to play around with this. This is stuff that like 2 years into my business, we're really starting to look at a lot more closely. So what this is it's basically percentage of users activated on that proxy metric against time. And so in month 0, when you first have a cohort of users signing up, 100% of them are in. But as time goes on, a bunch of them fall off and they stop using the product. I'm sorry, they stop using the product the way that you intend them to use with the frequency that you want. And so what you want to do is you want to figure out, okay, well, does this curve just fall down to 0 or does it flatten out? And if the curve flattens, it's an indicator of product market fit. Like there's different ways that you can measure product market fit, but one is like, how quickly does that curve flatten and where does it flatten? The way that you can run a fancy looking like line graph like that is by having data that looks like this. So what you want to do is you want to track a month, how many new people came in that month, and that's a cohort. So if we look at the top left here, we had 500 subscribers subscribe in January. That's month 0. In month 1, so in February, from the January signups, we had 350 left. In March, we had 300 left. In April, 250, May, and so on. And we pull that right. The February cohort. So in February, we had 650 show up, sign up. And by March, there were 350, April, 275. In March, we had 700, right? And then what you could do is you can start to look at your percent retained over time. And what you'll see is that, okay, so 3 months in, I guess 2 months into, no, let's look at 3 months into the user using the product. The people that came in January, only 50% of them are left. In the people that started in February, there's only 34% of them left. But the people that started in April, 3 months later, there were still 82% of them left. So what happened? Well, chances are the product got better. You built the right feature because you were experimenting, and you probably figured something out with marketing and onboarding to make it better and more personalized. So what you want to see is that your month 1, month 2, month 3 retention is getting stronger over time. And this is relatively tricky to measure. You do need like some kind of data platform to figure this out. But once you figure this out, this is gold for your brand, because then you can understand what your LTV is and what your product retention is. So what I did here is I just took this data and plotted it against this chart. So it's just a visual form. And you can see what's happening here is that the later I go on, the longer the line is, the longer people have been around. So this blue line is the January cohort, right? The short one, where these curves start to flatten, this looks a lot better. This means we're kind of approaching product market fit. And so for these later months here, what we're starting with is just a better set of users who are more engaged, that are higher retained. Then you can also break this down and you can say, okay, well, what's my retention by channel? And this becomes important as you start to think about your costs and opportunities around scaling different channels that you're going to go find customers in. And this may be wildly different. And then finally, you could start to think about LTV. So LTV, lifetime value, is a long-term metric, generally over a year, but you can, just like with proxy metrics against regular metrics, retention metrics, you can find a signal earlier. So I like to look at LTV in 3, 6, and 12-month intervals. Your 3-month interval becomes a proxy for what happens 6 months and 12 months down the road. Yellow here are good things that are happening. Red are bad things that are happening. All right. So that's kind of how I look at this from that perspective. And that's it. So my call to action is, if you want to talk with me on this stuff, I do free sessions. Definitely download those tools. If you didn't